My friends, today I want to share the remarkable story of Cleopatra, the final queen of ancient Egypt. This isn't just a history lesson, but a journey through time filled with passion, power, and ambition. Cleopatra remains one of the most famous women in all of history, and her life feels more like a film than a record of the past. So settle in, relax, and enjoy this tale, perfect for your English learning and for a bit of inspiration. I promise you'll love every part of it. Over 2,000 years ago, in 69 BCE, a child was born in Alexandria, Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra, and she would one day become a queen unlike any before her. But before ruling a kingdom, she was simply a young girl with enormous dreams. Cleopatra belonged to a royal dynasty known as the Ptolemies, who had governed Egypt for many generations. Yet their roots were not Egyptian, they came from Greece. Her ancestor, Ptolemy I, had served as one of Alexander the Great's trusted generals and later became ruler of Egypt after Alexander's death. Because of this, Cleopatra's heritage was a blend of Greek and Egyptian bloodlines. Her father, King Ptolemy XII, sat on the throne when she was born. Historians still debate the identity of her mother. Some believe it was Cleopatra V, though no one is completely sure. From her earliest years, Cleopatra grew up surrounded by wealth and luxury. She lived in a magnificent palace, wore fine garments, and had servants at her command. Yet, behind the golden walls of royalty, danger always lurked. In the Ptolemaic family, ambition ran deep, and power struggles were deadly. Relatives often fought, even killed each other, to seize the throne. From a young age, Cleopatra learned that knowledge was her greatest weapon. While most women in her time were kept from education, she studied with passion and discipline. She mastered several languages: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and even Hebrew. Some accounts claim she could speak 7 tongues fluently, an extraordinary skill that made her unique among rulers. She loved learning. Her curiosity led her to explore science, mathematics, literature, and politics. She didn't just want to wear a crown. She wanted to rule wisely and effectively. But intellect wasn't her only strength. Cleopatra possessed a kind of charm that captivated everyone who met her. People said her voice alone could win hearts. It wasn't just beauty that drew people to her. It was confidence and presence. Yet her childhood wasn't free from sorrow. Her father, King Ptolemy XII, struggled to keep control of his kingdom. Many Egyptians disliked him, calling him weak and accusing him of wasting wealth. At times, political unrest forced Cleopatra's family to flee Egypt for safety. These experiences taught her early that being royal meant living in constant danger. When Cleopatra was around 14, tragedy struck again. Her mother disappeared. Some said she died naturally. Others whispered she was murdered. Soon after, her father's health began to fail, leaving young Cleopatra facing a future full of uncertainty. Still, she prepared herself for the burden of power. Even as a teenager, she carried the determination of a future queen. What truly set Cleopatra apart from others in her dynasty was her deep love for Egypt. Though her bloodline came from Greece, her heart belonged to the Nile. She was the first of her family to learn and speak the Egyptian language, and she embraced its traditions wholeheartedly. She even portrayed herself as the goddess Isis, a powerful divine mother figure in Egyptian belief. This connection to her people made her beloved by many. By the time she reached adulthood, Cleopatra was ready to rule, clever, brave, and resolute. But the path to power would test every bit of her strength. And so begins the story of how a young woman would rise to become one of the most legendary rulers the world has ever known. Cleopatra was never an ordinary young woman. From the moment she was born, destiny had marked her for greatness. But the road to the throne of Egypt was dangerous, filled with betrayal, politics, and bold strategy. When she turned 18, her father, King Ptolemy XII, passed away. In his final will, he declared that Cleopatra should rule Egypt, but not alone. She was to share the throne with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old. In ancient Egypt, it was common for siblings to rule together, sometimes even marrying to preserve royal bloodlines. Yet Cleopatra had no desire to share power. She was educated, confident, and ambitious, while her brother was still a child who knew nothing of leadership. She believed she was far more capable of guiding Egypt's destiny. At first, Cleopatra tried to cooperate, but it soon became clear that powerful men in the royal court did not want a strong woman on the throne. Her brother's advisors conspired against her, whispering lies and spreading fear. They preferred Ptolemy XIII because he was easier to manipulate. Within a short time, Cleopatra was pushed out of the palace and forced into exile. Imagine it, the rightful queen of Egypt, once surrounded by luxury, now wandering the harsh desert with only a handful of loyal followers. She had lost her home, her throne, and her safety, but she had not lost her spirit. Cleopatra was not someone who surrendered to fate. Even in exile, she began to plan her return. She understood that to regain power, she needed an ally, someone powerful enough to challenge her enemies. And fortune soon brought her an opportunity. Around this time, the famous Roman general Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. Caesar was one of the most influential men in the world, commanding legions and shaping the future of Rome itself. Cleopatra realized this could be the key to reclaiming her kingdom. But meeting Caesar wouldn't be simple. Her enemies controlled the palace, and she knew she could not simply walk in. So she came up with a daring and unforgettable plan. One night, she ordered her servant to wrap her inside a large carpet. Yes, a carpet, and carry it as a gift to Caesar's quarters. When the carpet was unrolled before him, Cleopatra emerged, calm and radiant, her eyes full of confidence and wit. The sight left Caesar speechless. Here stood a young woman of remarkable intelligence and presence, bold enough to risk everything to meet him face to face. Cleopatra spoke with grace and conviction. She told Caesar of her struggles, her vision for Egypt, and her determination to rule wisely. Caesar admired courage and cleverness, and Cleopatra possessed both in abundance. Impressed by her bravery and fascinated by her charm, Caesar agreed to help her. Together, they devised a plan to defeat Ptolemy XIII and his scheming advisors. When the fighting broke out, Cleopatra and Caesar's combined forces overwhelmed the opposition. After a fierce battle near the Nile, Ptolemy XIII was defeated, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. Cleopatra's return to power marked a new beginning. She had survived betrayal, exile, and war, and now she stood as the true ruler of Egypt. But she wasn't content merely to rule. She wanted to rebuild Egypt's strength and restore its glory. Working closely with Caesar, she introduced reforms, improved trade, and stabilized the economy. She was young, intelligent, and unafraid to lead alongside one of the most powerful men of her time. Cleopatra's alliance with Julius Caesar was more than political. It became personal. The two shared admiration and respect for each other's brilliance. Together, they began shaping a vision of Egypt as a kingdom not only of beauty and wealth, but also of wisdom and influence. And thus began one of history's most fascinating partnerships, one that would soon grow into a story of ambition, love, and power that changed the ancient world forever. Cleopatra was now the undisputed queen of Egypt, but her reign was far from peaceful. She had regained her throne with the help of Julius Caesar, one of Rome's greatest generals, and their connection quickly became more than an alliance of convenience. Their relationship blended ambition, politics, and passion, setting the stage for a bond that would shape both Egypt and Rome. After the defeat of her brother Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra ruled confidently. She wanted Egypt to be more than a distant kingdom under Rome's influence. Her goal was to make her land powerful, respected, and independent. Caesar admired her determination, her intelligence, and her ability to command respect. In turn, Cleopatra saw in him a man of immense power who could help secure her nation's future. Though Caesar was much older, he was in his 50s, while Cleopatra was barely 21. The difference did not matter. Their minds connected, and both shared an unshakable sense of destiny. They spent long days together discussing politics, philosophy, and empire. They sailed the Nile, visited temples, and explored the wonders of Egypt. Cleopatra showed Caesar the brilliance of her culture, its art, architecture, and knowledge, and he was deeply impressed. Egypt, he realized, was far more than sand and pyramids. It was a civilization of immense wealth and wisdom. In 47 BCE, Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy Caesar, though he was known by a different name, Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. She saw in her child the future union of two great worlds, Egypt and Rome, and dreamed that he might one day rule over both. To Cleopatra, Caesarion was not just her son, but the living symbol of her vision. A world where Egypt would no longer bow to foreign powers, but stand proudly beside them. But even as she dreamed, danger grew. News of Caesar's relationship with the Egyptian queen spread quickly through Rome. Many Roman leaders despised Cleopatra, seeing her as a manipulative foreigner who had enchanted Caesar. They whispered that she sought to control him, to use her beauty and cunning to make Egypt the heart of a new empire. Caesar, however, was not easily swayed by public opinion. When he returned to Rome, he invited Cleopatra to join him. She accepted, traveling with her young son and an entourage so grand that the people of Rome were stunned. Her arrival was a spectacle: golden chariots, exotic animals, and attendants dressed in the colors of the Nile. Cleopatra wanted Rome to see Egypt's power with their own eyes. In Rome, she lived in a luxurious villa near Caesar's estate. She attended banquets, met senators, and even influenced Roman fashion with her elegant Egyptian style. Yet not everyone was impressed. Roman women whispered about her boldness, and men feared her influence. Cleopatra stood out in every way, not only for her beauty but for her intellect and confidence. As Caesar's power in Rome grew, so did the tension around him. In 44 BCE, he declared himself dictator for life, a title that angered many senators who feared the end of their republic. Plots began to form in secret. Cleopatra sensed the danger but could do nothing to stop it. Then, one tragic day, the inevitable happened. Julius Caesar was assassinated inside the Roman Senate. The man who had once ruled the world was struck down by those he thought were his allies. The news shattered Cleopatra. She had lost her greatest protector and the father of her son. Rome was thrown into chaos, and Cleopatra's position became perilous. Without Caesar, she was vulnerable, viewed by many Romans as a threat that needed to be eliminated. She made a swift decision. She would return to Egypt. Gathering her treasures, servants, and child, she left Rome before Caesar's enemies could act against her. Back in Alexandria, Cleopatra faced her grief with resolve. She refused to surrender to despair. Instead, she strengthened her army, improved the country's economy, and worked tirelessly to keep Egypt stable in a world that seemed ready to collapse. She devoted herself to her son's future, teaching him about leadership and preparing him to rule one day. But she knew the truth: Egypt's safety would always depend on Rome, and Rome itself was now divided. Without Caesar, powerful men fought for control of the empire. Cleopatra understood that if she wanted to survive and protect her kingdom, she would need to choose her next ally carefully. This time, her choice would lead her into another legendary partnership, one that would bring both love and destruction, glory and tragedy. After Julius Caesar's death, Rome fell into turmoil. Powerful men fought for control, and among them was Mark Antony, a skilled general, charismatic and fearless. Cleopatra saw in him both danger and opportunity. Antony, too, had heard of the Egyptian queen's intelligence and allure, and soon their paths would cross in a meeting that changed both their lives. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, she refused to appear as an ordinary ruler. Instead, she arrived like a goddess, sailing up the river on a golden ship with silver oars and purple sails. She appeared radiant, dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by servants perfumed and shimmering in silk. The spectacle left Antony astonished. Cleopatra had captured his attention completely, not through beauty alone, but through presence and power. Their meeting ignited a partnership that blended affection and strategy. Cleopatra invited Antony to Egypt, and he accepted eagerly. In Alexandria, they shared extravagant feasts, laughter, and endless nights of conversation. Cleopatra revealed to him the greatness of Egypt, its art, its knowledge, its wealth. Antony, accustomed to Roman austerity, was enchanted by her world. Soon, their alliance deepened into love. They were equals, both ambitious, both driven by visions of empire. Together, they dreamed of ruling not just Egypt or Rome, but a vast dominion uniting East and West. Cleopatra provided wealth, ships, and influence. Antony offered military might and Roman prestige. Each strengthened the other. Their union produced 3 children, the twins Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a younger son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Cleopatra saw in them the promise of a dynasty that could bridge nations. Yet their happiness provoked outrage in Rome. Many accused Antony of betraying his homeland for a foreign queen. His rival, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, began to spread rumors that Cleopatra had bewitched Antony, turning him against Rome. Antony's loyalty was tested when he abandoned his Roman wife, Octavia, Octavian's sister, to remain in Egypt. This insult deepened the divide between the two men, and soon their rivalry exploded into open hostility. Octavian declared Antony and Cleopatra enemies of Rome. As war loomed, Cleopatra and Antony prepared to face the greatest challenge of their lives. A final battle that would decide the fate of Egypt, their love, and their legacy. The final chapter of Cleopatra and Mark Antony's story began with the shadow of war. Octavian, their most dangerous enemy, was determined to destroy them both. He wanted Egypt's riches, Antony's power, and complete control of the Roman world. The lovers stood together, bound by loyalty and defiance, prepared to defend everything they had built, their kingdom, their family, and their pride. They gathered their armies and fleets to face Octavian at sea. The battle would take place near the western coast of Greece, in a place called Actium. Cleopatra commanded her Egyptian ships, glittering with gold and carved prows, while Antony led his Roman legions. Together, they believed they could win, that love and courage would be enough to withstand the might of Rome. The morning of battle dawned with the sun burning through the mist, the sea filled with the thunder of drums and the clash of oars. Cleopatra and Antony stood side by side, watching the horizon shimmer with enemy sails. For hours, chaos reigned. Arrows flew, ships collided, and fire spread across the waves. Then came the moment that changed everything. Cleopatra's fleet suddenly turned and began to retreat. Some say she saw the tide turning and made a desperate decision to save what remained. Others claim it was a signal of surrender. Antony, caught in the storm of battle, saw her ships fleeing and believed she had betrayed him. In anguish, he abandoned the fight and followed her, leaving his men leaderless. Octavian's forces seized the advantage and crushed what remained of Antony's army. The great dream of an Egyptian-Roman Empire collapsed in a single day. Back in Egypt, Antony sought out Cleopatra, demanding to know why she had fled. She wept and told him she had acted only to save them both, not to abandon him. Understanding the truth too late, Antony forgave her, and their bond grew even stronger in the face of ruin. Yet the world was closing in. Octavian's legions advanced toward Alexandria, determined to claim victory once and for all. Cleopatra and Antony prepared their city for the final stand. But deep down, they knew the outcome was inevitable. Rome was too strong, their armies too broken. Still, they refused to surrender. They would meet their fate with dignity. When Octavian's forces reached Alexandria, Antony led one last desperate battle. Outnumbered and outmatched, he fought with courage, but defeat was certain. In the chaos, he received false news that Cleopatra was dead. Struck by grief, he fell upon his sword, choosing death over capture. But the rumor was wrong. Cleopatra still lived. When she heard that Antony lay dying, she sent for him at once. He was carried to her hidden chamber, bleeding and weak. There, surrounded by gold and the faint scent of lotus, he died in her arms. The man she had loved and fought beside through triumph and tragedy. As Antony's life faded, Cleopatra understood that her own end was near. Octavian would soon reach the palace, and she knew what awaited her. Humiliation, a parade through Rome as a defeated queen. She refused to let that happen. After Antony's death, Cleopatra faced her final trial. Octavian entered Alexandria in triumph, the conqueror of Egypt. He demanded that the once great queen surrender herself and her treasures. Cleopatra, proud even in defeat, received him with calm dignity. She was no longer the radiant ruler of the Nile, but she still carried the poise of a queen. Octavian spoke politely, yet she saw the cold ambition in his eyes. He did not seek peace. He wanted a trophy to display before Rome, proof that no one could resist his power. Cleopatra understood his intentions. He would drag her through the streets of Rome in golden chains, a living reminder of Egypt's fall. To her, that fate was worse than death. She would not let the world see her humiliated or broken. The woman who had faced kings, generals, and empires would decide her own ending. In her final hours, Cleopatra prepared carefully. She dressed herself in royal robes and placed her crown upon her head. Her chambers glowed with soft light, filled with gold, jewels, and the scent of incense. Her attendants, loyal to the end, brought her treasures and the symbols of her reign, the legacy of the goddess she had long embodied. According to legend, she arranged for a basket of figs to be delivered to her chamber, concealing a small, venomous snake, the asp, sacred to the gods of Egypt. Cleopatra took the serpent in her hands and let it strike. The poison worked swiftly, and as the pain faded, peace returned to her face. She died as she had lived, proud, fearless, and in control of her destiny. When Octavian's soldiers found her, she was lying on a golden couch, dressed as a queen, her crown still gleaming in the dim light. The asp lay dead beside her. Octavian stood in silence, awed by her courage. He had won the war, but he could not conquer her spirit. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt's independence ended. Octavian claimed the land as Rome's new province, marking the fall of one of the world's oldest kingdoms. Yet Cleopatra's story refused to die. Her legend spread across the empire. Tales of her intelligence, her beauty, her boldness. Artists, writers, and philosophers would tell her story for centuries to come. Cleopatra was far more than the seductress her enemies described. She was a strategist, a scholar, a ruler who spoke the language of her people and sought to unite two great civilizations. She ruled in a world dominated by men and refused to be their puppet. Though her life ended in tragedy, her spirit became immortal. She had faced betrayal, war, and loss, yet never surrendered her pride or her vision. Her legacy lived on in her children, her monuments, and the hearts of those who admired her strength. Cleopatra's reign was not merely a story of love or death. It was a story of power, identity, and the timeless struggle to shape one's own fate. She proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to stand tall even when the world turns against you. Cleopatra's death marked the end of an age, but her story did not fade with her passing. Across Rome, whispers of her final act spread quickly. Some spoke of her bravery, others of her defiance. Yet even her enemies could not deny her strength. Octavian returned to Rome victorious, calling himself Augustus, the first emperor. He had conquered Egypt, but in doing so, he also ensured that Cleopatra's name would never be forgotten. In Egypt, the people mourned their queen. To them, Cleopatra had not been a foreign ruler from a Greek bloodline but the true daughter of the Nile. She spoke their language, honored their gods, and protected their traditions. She had ruled not from arrogance but from devotion, always believing that Egypt's heart must remain strong, no matter what empire surrounded it. Historians would later argue about her. Was she a cunning seductress or a visionary leader? But those who looked closely saw something deeper. Cleopatra was a woman who had mastered the art of survival in a world that constantly tried to silence her. She had faced the greatest powers of her time and refused to be a passive figure in their stories. She became the author of her own destiny. Her life also challenged how the world saw power. In an age when women were expected to remain silent, she spoke with command. When rulers were guided by greed, she led with intellect and strategy. Her reign showed that leadership could come not only from force, but from wit, wisdom, and presence. Generations later, poets, artists, and scholars would resurrect her image. To the Romans, she became a symbol of mystery. To Egypt, a reminder of pride. Shakespeare would write her as the queen who aged not with time, a spirit too bold to be tamed by death. Painters portrayed her last moments in shimmering gold and shadow, her beauty mingling with tragedy. Yet beyond the legends and the romance, the truth remains simple. Cleopatra was human, a leader trying to preserve her people in an era of conquest. Her choices were not always perfect, but they were always driven by purpose. She balanced the burdens of love and power, ambition and loyalty, until the very end. Even after centuries, her influence lingers. Her name evokes beauty, intelligence, and the courage to rule in one's own right. The pyramids and temples she restored still stand beneath the Egyptian sun, silent witnesses to her reign. And though her tomb was lost to time, her story continues to rise, again and again, like the Nile after the floods, eternal, alive, and unstoppable. Cleopatra's story, though ancient, still echoes through the centuries, not just as a tale of a queen, but as a lesson about power, resilience, and the courage to define oneself. Her life was filled with triumph and tragedy, yet even in defeat, she never lost her sense of purpose. She stood as proof that greatness is not measured by how long one rules, but by how fiercely one lives. Throughout her life, Cleopatra faced impossible choices: exile, war, betrayal, and love tangled with politics. Yet each time she chose to act rather than submit. She spoke many languages, understood diplomacy better than her rivals, and ruled with intelligence as sharp as any general's sword. She was not just a figure of beauty or romance, but a ruler who understood the complex balance between charm and authority. Her story reminds us that strength comes in many forms. It can appear in the roar of battle or in the quiet resolve of someone who refuses to bow. Cleopatra's strength was not merely physical or political. It was the strength of identity, of knowing who she was and what she stood for, even as the world tried to define her otherwise. For centuries, men wrote about her. Some admired her brilliance, others feared her power. But the truth that endures is this: she was extraordinary because she refused to live by the limits placed upon her. She claimed her throne, her choices, and her destiny, no matter the cost. Her legacy still speaks to us today, tells us to be bold, to think deeply, to fight for our dreams even when the odds are impossible. She reminds us that courage often comes disguised as grace, that wisdom can shine brighter than any crown, and that dignity can outlast empires. Cleopatra's reign ended with her death, but her spirit became immortal. She lives on in every story of a woman who refuses to be silenced, in every dreamer who dares to rise after falling, and in every leader who believes that conviction can change the world. So, let her story stay with you. Let her life remind you that even when darkness surrounds you, you still hold the power to shape your fate. Like Cleopatra, you can stand tall against fear, stay true to your vision, and write your own legend, one choice, one act of courage at a time. Be bold. Be unbreakable. Be unforgettable just as she was.